Hello, I am back with another list. This time we're going to talk about some short story collections. I feel like a lot of people don't think about short stories or they don't know much about them because all of the marketing goes to its popular cousin, the novel. But as I will explain, short stories are the bomb diggity, and there's some cool ones out there that you should check out. So let's get started. I think there's a couple big reasons why short stories should have a place on your reading roster. The first, which is that they're bite-sized, they're super convenient to read. You don't have to wade through a big novel. They're all reasonably shortish length, and you just get a little piecemeal moment. They're not as demanding that you finish it in a certain time period or all at once. The other great thing about it is it can help you find new authors, new styles of writing that you're really into. When you have the benefit of 10 plus stories in one collection, they can do some nifty, fun, cool things that maybe traditional publishing wouldn't have given them a shot at a full-length novel, or just stories that are really cool that just aren't going to be 300 pages. And finally, if you are a wannabe writer, it's great because you get to see beginnings, middles, and ends very quickly, one after another. And so it gives you the opportunity to practice reading those different points in a story to kind of fine-tune what these other authors are doing as well as what you could be doing in your own work. It also gives you a repertoire of both old and new authors that are making headway into the spaces that you want to be a part of. Different big hitters that are kind of changing the genre or changing the industry in cool, fun ways. And it's helpful to know who those people are and what they're doing with their work. Now, I have 11 books. So let's get started. First, we have Masterpieces of the Best Science Fiction of the 20th Century, edited by Orson Scott Card. There's a variety of this kind of style of collection that you can find, especially with genre fiction, so sci-fi, fantasy, all that fun stuff. But I can particularly recommend this one in this edition. I actually had it for college, and you got all of the big names in it. You got Isaac Asimov, you got Ray Bradbury, Arthur C. Clarke, Ursula K. Le Guin, like all of these like big hitting names that have been rocking sci-fi and fantasy for a long ass time. And so if you've heard these names but you haven't dabbled in their work, this is a cool place to start is with their short stories, especially because short stories had a bigger splash back in the day. So a lot of the famous authors that you know have played, equal hand in short stories and novels. And so before you commit to a longer work, you can just see some of their more popular short stories that have influenced things, as well as the fact that like George R.R. Martin's here, so you get some contemporary still living authors as well. So I think it's a really good blend. It's a good introductory level thing to kind of touch base with all these different people, and they're exploring these very different things. You have space, you have robots, you have these fantastical creatures that bring up themes of what is religion, what is out there, is there something beyond us, etc., etc. There's so many cool things. So highly recommend. Even if you don't like every story, I think it's a really interesting read. The next book I don't have on me, but the title is Lesser Known Monsters of the 21st Century by Kim Fu. So this is sci-fi and fantasy, but same author. I read this year. It was so good. And like you'll probably hear me say several times in this video, these are my top recommendations because I like almost to a story loved them. Like it was very rare to find stories in these collections that I disliked or didn't see a purpose or a value in. Like they were just solid reads all the way through, which is one of the things about dabbling with short story collections is you tend to get more of a mixed bag of like hit or miss. And these guys are just straight up gold. So the Lesser Known Monsters of the 21st Century, this is a more contemporary read. I think it came out 2021, 2022. She runs the gambit and like really experiments. So she's got some fantasy, she's got some sci-fi, she's got some experimental where like It's just a story of dialogue back and forth. It was very thought-provoking, but also entertaining, which sometimes with literary doesn't always go together. But yeah, if you've read it, I would love to hear what your thoughts were on it. It was just a banger. I don't want to say too much because I don't want to spoil any of the short stories, but yes, if you like sci-fi fantasy, check it out. I think you'll drive with it, and I'm curious to see what else Kim Fu has written because I definitely want to read more of her stuff. Bloodchild by Octavia E. Butler. I feel like Octavia E. Butler in the last couple of years has had like a resurgence, is having a moment in the spotlight for literary, also genre writers, which is so dope. I remember maybe 7 years ago, I was trying to get a book of hers and like a lot of them were out of print. They were kind of hard to come by. They had like not the best covers in my opinion. And now like there's new editions galore. So stoked. I don't know if she's still alive, but oh no, she's not. But either way, I'm glad that this cool author is getting a moment and her work is getting recirculated. And so this is also sci-fi fantasy, but much darker. Several of the stories are dabbling with horror, sometimes like psychological elements, sometimes just a little bit body horror, I guess is maybe the element. I don't dabble in that genre a lot, if you guys know, but it's just so well done in here. And the story, Bloodchild, I still think about it. I'm still shooketed. I still probably need counseling on it. It was something else. Really compact little collection of short stories, but really interesting. It deals with themes of dystopian, mental illness, rape, aliens, disability. So if you're not scared of the darker side, this is probably a good read for you. Okay, so Strange Candy by Laurel K. Hamilton. She is pretty well known for her Anita Blake series, also her Mary Gentry series. I have only read the first book of the Anita Blake series, but I do really like the Mary Gentry series. However, you do not need to have read her main works in order to enjoy the short story collection, which is pretty nice. Now, you have a couple stories in here that are in the same world as her other stuff, but I didn't have any problem understanding it. And then there's one with Anita Blake herself, but again, I think you could vibe with it even if you don't know anything about her. It's kind of its own little nugget of a short story that you can just consume and then leave the rest. I'm sure there's more maybe Easter eggs if you are familiar with the series, but this is also sci-fi fantasy, heavier on the fantasy element, and my girl knows how to do funny moments. There's a touch of like some darker moments, but not too crazy. And then we got a little bit of sensual, erotic. Doesn't go as far as her other series do, but yeah, so if you're like, I like my genre, I like my fantasy, but what about some humor? What about some sexy times? This would be a good choice for you. Next is another book I don't have in my collection, but it's called African Short Stories, 20 Short Stories from Across the Continent, edited by Chinua Achebe? Achebe? Why do I do? I really should look these things up, but too late. This is different literary perspectives from all over Africa. Obviously, it's insane to think that like everything can be covered in one short story collection when you're talking about Africa that has so many nations and tribes and languages and experiences and whatever. But this is such a cool little starting point. It's not a big book, but I feel like you get quite a range. You get some names that I was familiar with as far as writers, but also plenty that I didn't know. Yeah, you gotta start somewhere, right? And so instead of buying, 20 novels, it was kind of nice to like have a little sample platter of some of the styles of these authors writing and kind of the topics that they're diving into and things like that. And so the collection is just kind of divided into the cardinal directions. So like Northern Africa, Southern Africa, Eastern Africa, Western Africa. And you just get like, again, a little dabbling, a little sprinkle of different, I think it's mostly modern works. And so this is more literary bent, but I do think there's at least one magical realist story in there. Definitely worth checking out, especially if you are missing a gap if there's a gap in your reading on African stories. Number 6, we have Things We Lost in the Fire by Marina Enriquez. And so this is good if you like some dark literary. There's some stories with magical realism, but it's definitely a more literary bent. There's a touch of, I would call like maybe realist feminist horror, perhaps might be the you know, because it's dealing with a lot of dark but real topics that are grounded in Argentinian history and also just reflections on contemporary life given circumstances as far as dictatorship and massacres and trafficking and different things like that. So really cool, really interesting read, and then you get a nice dose of South American Latin literature that I definitely need to read more of. But if you haven't read any, this is a good place to start. Then we have Mad Country stories by Samrit Ubdadie. And so most of the stories take place in either Nepal or the US. It's a lot of themes related to the intersecting of cultures. Where do people belong? What responsibility do people have when they are immigrants or tourists or what have you? And it explores a lot of different relationships a person can have with a place in a country, in a culture, in a people, and yeah, how those things come together in interesting ways and can sometimes create some friction. This one's a good literary read. Don't be scared by my saying literary. I thought they were enjoyable, really accessible works. It's not like dense and academic by any means. And there's like a sprinkle of humor throughout. While there is a bit of darkness at times, it doesn't glorify or linger on it. So I didn't find it a hard read in that regard. I just kind of stumbled on this at a book fair and I was really happy I picked it up. So you should too. Oakley Dokley. Next one on the docket, we have Blasphemy by Sherman Alexie. Do your homework, do your research on this. I'm not a journalist. I vaguely heard there was some hubbub some years ago with this author. I don't get paid to look at that shit, but you know, libraries exist, used bookstores exist, but I just thought this was such a good collection of stories. Again, hitting it out of the ballpark with each story, and it was just like, wow, that's cool. Oh my god, that's an interesting perspective. That's an interesting story. And in a way that they all felt cohesive, like they belonged in the same collection, but they didn't feel redundant or so overlapping that it's like, oh, okay, well, we kind of already did that before. Okay, we kind of already got that message or theme. It's like they each stand well on their own and together. And so this is a lot about Native Americans. There's a good wittiness to it, but it can also be heartbreaking at times. Kind of runs the gambit of like human emotions. And yeah, I think it's an excellent pick if you're wanting to read more contemporary and literary short stories about Native American life and perspective. So then we have The Accusation, Forbidden Stories from Inside North Korea by Bondi. It's claimed that Bondi is actually a North Korean who's still living in North Korea. I don't know. But this is like the only fiction I've read about North Korea because I've just read so much nonfiction. And I have to say that they did a really good job with it. Like, I think you can go walk into these without having too much background about North Korea and Koreans. You don't have to have read the 20 plus books that I have. Of course, a little bit of background knowledge would be handy, but yeah, it just covers different part of North Korean life and struggles and truly seeing the thing that I think we tend to forget about when it comes to politics, which is like, governments can be bad and people can be good. Like, you know, like people are so much more than whoever's ruling them. And so I think shining a light on the humanity of the North Korean people is super beneficial, and that they are not just people who are struggling, but like they are well-rounded mothers, daughters, sons, uncles, just people, ordinary people in unfortunate circumstances. The next one I don't have a physical copy of, but it's called Difficult Women by Roxane Gay. This is interesting if you want to read a short story collection that kind of revolves around the theme, in this case, difficult women. Roxane really plays with the idea of likability. Does a main character need to be likable? What does it say about us that like we kind of push away especially female characters, if we don't think that they're good enough or likable. And you just get this really compelling collection of contemporary literature short stories that revolve around really hard topics. You have abuse, you have neglect, you have prejudice, you have fat phobia, and characters that are making not great decisions sometimes, or making hard decisions, or being mean, or being frustrating. And I think that was a really interesting way to structure and have that thread throughout this collection. So you can understand, even though she dabbles in different genres. So I do think there's one dystopian and maybe one sci-fi fantasy, maybe. It all cohesively fits under that umbrella of difficult women. Roxane Gay, powerhouse author. She's written a lot of cool nonfiction, but if you wanted to read some of her fiction, this would be a cool place to start. And lastly, we're at the finish line, guys. We have The Best of Saki by Saki, but also not really, because he's just a British dude who decided to go by the name Saki. What's his actual name? It always kills me, because I picked this up totally thinking it was like Japanese literature because of the name, and then it's like, his name's like Monroe or some shit. I'm not seeing it here. Anyway, anywho, that's not the point. The point is you should pick it up because my boy Saki be funny. He's a hoot. He's got that good British humor. He kind of, you know, pokes fun at his characters. A lot of his stories are like pro animals and like nature, which is also kind of fun. And he's just kind of like turning on the table on like Edwardian society and being like, come on guys, this is kind of silly. This is kind of ridiculous. I kind of compare him sometimes to Oscar Wilde. His prose isn't as flowery or elaborate as Oscar Wilde's, but their humor, I think, is very comparable. And their views and perspective on the culture and norms of their time is, I think they would be buds. It's a good read, it's a good time, and unlike some other maybe older fiction, I think you can dive right into this. Like, I didn't struggle to like, what's going on? I don't understand what's happening. It's a very straightforward style of narration, and you know, you don't have a sentence going on for like a whole page or really outdated, archaic language that you're like, okay, I'm gonna have to look that up too. Okay. Yeah, I just breezed through it. I had a good ass time. It's just a fun little companion to take along with you, and I think it makes for a great summer read. Actually, I think all of these, depending on your mood and your vibe, would be good summer reads. So that is it. That is all. We have 11 short story collections. I hope one of those suits your fancy. I know they did for me. Highly recommend. If you have any good short story collection recommendations, leave them down below. Let's compile like a whole list for the peoples. And if you like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. And I'll see you next time. Bye!